All right. Good evening, friends. Welcome today to another moment of Tertuliando en Cuarentena, gathering and conversing, entering into dialogue in the space of quarantine that's been going on now for over 4 months. Quite surreal. Seems like time stops, but at the same time, it's going really rapidly. It's like a little combination of both. So tonight, thank you to all who are passing by, who stick around. Equally welcome and equally important. You're free to comment, free to cast questions to me, to our guest, and so please feel completely free to partake in this dialogue as you feel comfortable to do so as it progresses. So today, Monday, August 3rd, we have a good friend of mine who's joining us from the West Coast. I am in the center. I'm in the center coast. And so now, without any further ado, let's bring on my friend Angie. Angie
Hey,
Fadel. Is it Fadel or Fadel?
it's fatal.
Fadel. Muy bien. Angie Fadel, gracias. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate you taking this space and time for this kind of like a bit of a different thing as far as the visual element uh, than what you usually do, but I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm excited. I think I told you a minute ago I had to like clear the house of all the people and hopefully the dogs don't bark too loud.
Oh, that's fine. They're free to partake. I don't make that disclaimer originally or usually, but dogs or cats are completely welcome to partake in this dialogue as well. I won't be able to subtitle or caption their conversation, but they're free to engage as well.
If only we knew what they were saying.
Yeah, I know, right? It's beyond ourselves. It's too deep. So, I like to begin conversations. You're talking about the present moment, and the present moment is quite rapidly changing, yet also staying a bit the same. Taking into account the 4 months that we've been swimming into this lagoon, and each person in each country in each context experiences it quite differently. So, how have you, in your context, experienced this? It goes back, dating back to March, and what was the routine? What were you partaking of? Uh, that it found you kind of partaking or found you doing that it definitely was there as a reminder, like, or as a statement, like things are going to change from now on. So what were you doing? How did this shift what you were doing? How has it been for you for these last 4 months? And also maybe a little bit of your perspective socially as to what things you have maybe seen as a product of this.
Yeah. Well, before quarantine, I was teaching archery. I teach a mindful and meditative archery class out of my private practice, and I was doing that 2 or 3 times a week. I had bought tickets to come to Houston and do my second year in a row archery out in Tomball, which isn't that far from you.
Mm-hmm.
Really excited. I mean, a lot of work goes into behind the scenes stuff.
Yeah.
And I was also going for the first time to Charlottesville, Virginia, to do an archery workshops there, and had bought tickets for both of those things. I'm a very small business. I also do spiritual direction with people. So pretty much my entire um, work slowed to a snail's pace. So I went from, not only my podcast, but all the things that I do with humans that I love to empower people through archery. It really unlocks stuff, to doing none of that. Um, and, I don't have a ton of spiritual direction clients. So that's something that maybe I meet with somebody 1 or 2 times a week. So that's pretty much stayed the same. I mean, some clients have had to stop because of lack of finances, or just trying to reorientate their lives. So really, it's brought into question like pretty much everything that I do. And kind of forced me to see, I think you and I have talked a little bit about this, but to see where, even though I am anti-capitalist,
Mm-hmm.
how still to kind of do your own business, you end up buying into this capitalistic structure that I don't agree with at all, that
Yeah.
pulls people up and spits them out. So really for me, it's been a lot of reflection with no answers on the end. So all the things that I tell my clients about staying in, a place of questioning that's healthy,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like I do myself. I've had to really stay in that tension of not having the answers. Our daughter graduated from high school. She had to have her 18th birthday with her parents. She had to have a social distance graduation. We had a graduation party in our front, a drive-by graduation party in our front yard.
Yeah.
Her school is probably going to be postponed. So all of these, I mean, this isn't news to anybody out there. All of these major milestones coming of age that, especially I think in American culture, where it's frowned upon if you don't move out.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Yes.
or you think there's something wrong with you. So
See. Yeah. Yeah.
you can do everything right. She had a job lined up right before the pandemic. She got hired at a restaurant 2 blocks from our house, never manifested. All of the things that she would be doing, she can't do. So that's been going on while trying to walk her through that. And then our son is in LA working as an essential worker. So that's had all of these other components to it, and how culture basically strips people of their humanity and doesn't acknowledge that is, you have to know how to do stuff to do that work. And just trying to hold our kids intact while trying to hold ourselves intact, but at the same time, very grateful that I have people that do emotional labor with me, that
Mm-hmm.
I'm not living in an environment that's toxic, that I can't talk to people about my feelings or get space. And I'm with other people, so that I really have very little to complain about in that regard.
I'm curious as to, you mentioned your daughter's example, and this is quite the the new experiencing tales of this generation of, like, having to, this, visualizing the, virtualized graduations, this coming of age is transitioning during this times of pandemic. I as a mom, but also as an outside looker, meaning kind of like you're not the one experiencing, but you're talking about your daughter. She's connected with you. She's just,
Yeah.
you have the, what are your, how do you think, and this is just theorizing,
Yeah.
but how do you think this will touch upon your daughters, and also the people that have partook in the same similar experiences? How do you think it'll affect them into, I mean, maybe in terms of commenting on the resiliency, but how do you think it'll affect them? Those ceremonial events that are usually experienced in that, shoulder to shoulder experience with your camaraderie. So,
Well, first I want to say, are we allowed to say swear words on this?
what are swear words? I'm not quite. I'm not.
I think resiliency is bullshit.
Here is colorful all the way, so you're fine.
And what I mean by that is, yes, people are resilient. They overcome major things in spite of X, Y, and Z. So yes, we are resilient. But when my son was really little, he had eczema, that was just like staph infections and splitting open his skin and all this terrible stuff. And we went to these specialists, and we didn't have insurance, all these hoops that we had to jump through, and they didn't have any answers. And one of the doctors even said, well, at least when he gets older, he'll have compassion and empathy for other people because of this experience he's gone through. Well, yes, but that's fucked up. One does not equate the other. And so, yes, she is resilient. She has been fairly easy to live with. I mean, this is the time when she would be, pushing away from us, which is healthy and needed. And she can't really push away because there isn't anything to push to. And adults don't know what they're doing. The structures in place have made, using university as an example, which the institution is majorly flawed. But they're making them jump through these hoops that just actually make quarantine and isolation harder. So, yes, I think she's resilient. I think her generation has had to put up with so much from our generation and the previous generations. We've handed them, a dumpster fire. And yes, they are resilient and they are our hope for our future. And I think that's a lot to put on them. Maybe what will happen, and again, you said we're just theorizing, but is they're going to look at the things that we consider valuable and basically put a middle finger up to it.
Very likely.
Because so many things that we value are not, yes, it's worth valuing somebody's work to graduate from high school or college. I'm not denying that.
Mm-hmm.
But also there are people that do equally or more transformative milestones that we never acknowledge, like coming across the border into the United States. Like, we don't celebrate that.
Which, by the way, I want to point out, I just saw the new Netflix Immigration Nation. It's a 6-part series. It literally just came out, so I literally just gobbled it down overnight. And it is it's a lot. It's a lot to take. And again, this is just a documentary that only pieces a tiny part of it.
Yeah.
But you're talking about that crossing the border experience, that the fact that kids and adults or any people of any age have that as a testimonial, it's heavy to.
Well, and what we make people do, how we commodify people. And, going back to your question, I guess what I hope is, yes, I hope that people get beautiful. We celebrate people. We should be celebrating people. And I guess what I hope comes out of this is that expands to the things that people endure, like survivors or, people down at the protests right now that are getting the shit beat out of them by the feds and the cops, or people coming across the border, not held up as exceptional people necessarily, but held up as like, this was a hard thing. Let's celebrate. Well, one, let's make it easier so they don't have to do that. But then also celebrating these things that people do, not just the things that we can go, oh, that looks in, and I can only speak from white perspective. So in my perspective as a white person growing up in a middle class, working class family, the things that we valued, I hope the lid gets blown off of that.
Mm-hmm.
And people can celebrate things like my dad, climbing up telephone poles and becoming friends with all of the people that were his, people that he fixed their telephones,
Mm-hmm.
We don't celebrate that.
Yeah, I think that's a bit of a commentary to that which we have probably predefined as mundane, or as I don't know if the word is quotidian, like things that are just everyday things. And also it's hard to within a context that does talk specifically within a U.S. American context that of course has its celebrations, but has very questionable celebrations, has the celebrations of things that are usually based on very disturbing constructs, like celebrating certain levels of heroism to for example, I don't know if I was sharing it with you. I don't know if I was sharing this with you earlier, but the discourse that was going on in my school, where they were celebrating a sense of heroism for the flexibility that teachers are having, and then like, and at the same time, some of these teachers are also telling me, I'm afraid to speak out. I'm afraid to talk out. So when you have a leader, a principal, a custodian, whatever, a leader, the head honcho of a particular school, and he is instilling that narrative of, great job you're doing, guys. How do you, I mean, like, just right then, that's the parting point. That's the starting point. There is no problematization of that, because you're already starting like, this is what you're meant to do.
Yeah.
And since you're doing this, oh my God, good on you. Who the hell is gonna there to contradict that?
Yeah, there's no choice.
There is no choice. And then I hear behind the scenes, people, when some people start problematizing, and then some people go to you, they're like, thank you for problematizing this. I feel like I can't speak, because if I speak, I fear this and that will happen, rightfully, because usually that this or that will happen.
Yeah.
And I think that is the whole, there's so much framing in this country to talk about, in this country in particular, but also in many countries, but in this country in particular, where where we heroify, let's put it that way, to obviously to leave the status quo untouched.
Yeah.
And it boils my blood.
It goes back to that resiliency thing.
See. That's what I was connecting it to. See.
Just because I can doesn't mean it's right or I should.
Exactly. Yeah.
Just because I can usually means, like in the situation you're talking about, I don't have much of a choice if I want to feed my family. And there's so many layers to it, because really it comes down to capitalism.
Of course. And the people on top of the other that are pushing towards something, like, pushing towards school reopening. That's obviously a political move, especially in a state that is having the COVID cases rise up the roof.
Yeah.
So there are political moves, because you want to claim that things are normalized. What better way than to reopen schools?
Yeah.
An argument that the kids are the number one thing. There's no better place to learn in school. Yes, there's no better place of learning than face-to-face. There's no better. Of course, we know that, but that's not what we're talking about.
No. Plus, let's be honest. School is dangerous enough in this country. My daughter has lived through bomb threats. Luckily, they've never had a gun at their school, but that is an American thing that happens. So we have that, and we have already proved as a nation that we don't give a shit about kids, because if we gave a shit about kids, we would have enacted the gun restrictions that most of Americans, over 70 to 80% of Americans, want some kind of gun reform. So we don't care about what Americans think. We don't care about children. So then, to build off of that platform that's already started, now you say that you care about children, and you care about teachers. When
so hypocritical.
When your idea of doing gun reform is to arm teachers, all these things, it's a backward. It goes. It's very much what the Black Lives Matter movement is trying to illustrate by the protests.
Mm-hmm.
You cannot go in and fix a white supremacist system. You can't fix a system that is based in white supremacy and racism, and just like we said in the podcast that you did with me, and just paint over it. Let's just paint over it. Just sloganize it, and then everybody is gonna be okay with it. And for years and years and years, people have been given a concession.
Mm-hmm.
And they've taken that concession, and I don't blame them. This is not me saying I wouldn't have done the same. In good faith, that they would then keep working towards racial justice, dismantling, the militarized police, all the things. And as soon as they take that little carrot dangled in front of them, usually the carrot is withdrawn anyway and they don't get anything.
Yeah. Yeah.
So so to then expect people to believe what you say, but that's exactly what they're doing. But they, to expect people to believe what you say, yeah, it's hypocritical. The bare minimum, it's hypocritical. But I would say it's anti-humanity.
Yeah. And I didn't even I wasn't even contemplating the whole the numerous amount of school shootings. I didn't even think about that. So even there's a pragmatic approach to not be in school to keep the kids safe. I totally,
Yeah.
and that speaks into how things become so normalized. I didn't even ponder on that.
Yeah.
And also that's probably a little bit to do with so many things going on.
Well, also you have they make teachers pay for most of their own supplies. So,
Yeah, of
you're going to
course.
give me a mask, that you're going to protect the students when
Yeah.
I'm like supplying the
Oh
cleaner.
no, but now that's the thing. That's also part of it. We are supplying you PPE. We don't exactly know how it's going to be implemented with distancing with kids, but we of course we want to build a whole discourse and rhetoric that we have it all figured out. You don't want to seem like what politician or what person in power wants to give out a discourse looking insecure or looking like he doesn't or she doesn't know what they're going to do. But that's the thing that I find really disturbing is just this bullshit pretentious play or theatric, like you really know what's going to happen. You don't know what's going to happen. Be honest.
Yeah, I mean, look at Europe. We're never going to get to experience a second wave because we haven't had a break in between.
Mm-hmm.
But they're experiencing their second wave. So all of these standards that they thought they were meeting, as far as I understand, they're having to rethink those as well. So
it's changing day to day.
So nobody knows. And stop pretending like you do. If you actually do know, then maybe you should take over the CDC.
Good luck. Good luck robbing that gig off those grips and claws and hands. Mira, Angie, to get to know a little bit more about you, if you could share, I'll ask you some questions of my own personal interest, but if you could share, 2 or 3 experiences that you feel are cathartic in the course of your life that you can reference throughout the whole your life as a whole, even if you have to go back as to when you were a child, that you feel are 3 moments or 3 processes or 3 seasons that you think were quite significant to form the person you are today.
Yes. I'll narrow it down to 3.
Yeah, you can maybe sneak in 3 in the form of 1, and then 3 in the form of 2, and then 3 in the form of 3. That's fine. But yeah, sure away. Feel free.
I think probably the first is growing up in an evangelical charismatic household, seeing what I would consider miraculous things. So, very dualistic. So I have my spiritual or my church life over here that's full of rules and regulations, but still I'm seeing some beautiful, exciting things. And then me, from a very young age, probably because of trauma, which will be my second thing, really having a connection to Jesus. And probably the Holy Spirit, which is a little more nebulous, but there has been something that has been rooted in me from the beginning, and probably has to do with growing up in that kind of a household. But I look at it now like the radical life of Jesus radically changed my life.
Mm-hmm.
And Jesus doesn't fit, and I didn't ever fit. I present very strong and tough, but really I'm a sensitive, emotive person that did not fit in my family of origin. I was too sensitive, too emotional, too caring, which now I'm like, those things are all the things that I value in other people. So,
Yeah.
so I think that has kind of, I would say, created a certain neural pathway in my brain to always connect and look for people that don't fit and
The
find
misfits.
yeah, those have always been my people, whatever that looks like. In school, I was friends with pretty much everybody. Back then we had a smoking section. So funny that you can't legally smoke, but you have a smoking section in high school. Anyway, sign of the times. I was friends with the heavy metal kids, the smokers. I was friends with everybody, and I just like people. And I think that moved me into a place where, even though the church told me, you love the sinner but you hate the sin, and be in the world but not of the world, which I think is all bullshit, and it
All the best slogans,
completely,
top 5 slogans in the Christian world.
and I'm completely misunderstanding what that means.
Mm-hmm.
So, there was a lot of years in there where I couldn't make sense of, like, how do I continue to love and hang out with my gay friends? So this is in the 80s. I graduated from high school in 89. When my church was saying, they're going to go to hell. All of these things, that growing up in the church, also being terrified of losing your faith. So there's this thing inside where you're like, that doesn't sound like Jesus, but this is my representation of Jesus, and always trying to make those things fit together. And then when I moved right after high school. I was in a violent relationship with another person. While they were violent against me, I had to move away. And then I ended up living overseas, working with YWAM, Youth with a Mission, for any of you that know it. And for me, my experience with Youth with a Mission was transformational, because I had never met Christians that swore, drank, smoked, were open to experiencing the world in different ways.
What country were you in?
I did I was based out of Amsterdam in the Netherlands.
Okay.
And then I've been all over. And then I also was in South Africa right after apartheid fell.
Oh, wow.
So, those have been transformative experiences for me, seeing the world outside of the American context. And I never wanted to move back. I was deported and ended up back in the United States.
As you were traveling with YWAM, did you, because this is a Christian ministry, and it's basically an evangelistic ministry, and but each country has its own context. Were there moments that you remember that were of heavy contrast between, maybe, let's say, American YWAM, and then you find European or South African YWAM, or at least maybe not the institution, but maybe the experiences that happen to happen in those?
Oh, absolutely. I would never, sorry to any YWAMers out there that have done YWAM in the United States, I would never do YWAM in the United States, ever. In fact, I've heard horror stories.
Or in Puerto Rico, which is equally horrible.
South Africa, very similar. And I think that is, we have a similar, I'm not saying the Dutch don't have this, but there's a very similar colonialism within South Africa as within the United States. So very controlling religious, versus the Netherlands, which is kind of open. They had needle wagons to offer clean needles, back in the early 80s. And I was like, mind blown.
Yeah.
And so my experience I never did anything in the United States. My experience in the Netherlands was amazing. I felt like I couldn't lead somebody to Christ if I was on my deathbed, and that was the only way I could get into heaven. I am terrible at
like as in like out of principle you didn't do it, or like you sucked at it.
I sucked at it, and it's inauthentic to I realize now the reason I sucked at it is because I felt like it was inauthentic,
Mm-hmm.
and it's hard to be good at something that feels inauthentic to you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, makes
But I
sense.
was able to. Here's the thing, too. I was, as a woman, a young woman. I was 21 when I first did something with YWAM. I went to Amsterdam when I was 22. I stayed in YWAM till I was 27, almost 27.
Wow.
And I, as a woman, as a leader, I got more opportunities to lead things within that context than at any experience in my life previously to that.
Okay.
Which, probably is not everybody's experience, but
Mm-hmm. But it was yours.
yeah, I didn't have to deal with too much patriarchal bullshit.
Okay.
Now, South Africa, when I went to South Africa, it was a little bit different, but because I went with friends that had been leading in Amsterdam, I by connection to them was given some power that I probably wouldn't have been given.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I was mainly leading the schools that you have to do anything within YWAM, which is called the discipleship training schools. And I was leading those and then taking teams to other places with a focus on relief and development. Like with a
Okay.
focus not necessarily to lead anybody to heaven or
Quick
Christianity,
salvation. Yeah.
but to lead to, like, does there need to be medicine taken somewhere? Does there need to
Yeah.
be food taken somewhere? Like, that was my focus, and I think because of that, I have a little different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But then, because of that experience of being given the opportunity as a woman within a religious context to be a leader, when I ended up getting deported,
You got deported.
yeah, I wasn't going to go back into a role as a subservient woman. So that's just kind of, I've been dismantling my own anti-feminism, or I can't even think of a word for it, but and with each year, with each experience, and my own work on my own trauma, becoming an intersectional feminist. And if people don't know what that means, basically, my feminism is not worth anything if it is not tied in with Black liberation, queer liberation,
Mm-hmm.
liberation, um, liberation for fat femmes or people that are otherly abled. My
Yeah.
feminism is worthless if it's not
Yes.
tied up with yours.
Yeah. If it's not taking those into account. Yeah.
And for me, that goes back to that original little girl who all I wanted to see was connection with people. I love the human story and how our human story is wrapped up in the story of each other if we let it.
Yeah.
Even though America is so individualistic, that's why we're so lonely and so fucked up. But if we connect to that human story and really the story of intersectional feminism, then we are tied together. And that's all I wanted as a child. That's why I connected to Jesus, because I think that the story of Jesus is tied up in the story of humanity.
Claro. Claro. Do you have any well, rephrase. I'm interested in knowing. Maybe I might skip if I skip some parts that you might have you might want to touch on. You're free to not follow my leap. But I remember hearing about the bridge before I even met you and Todd. I I think at that time I was just I think at that time I was involved in Revolution with Jay. Um, Maybe, yeah, when I was in Brooklyn. And I think I was, attempting to just at least, to navigate online, emerging or subaltern ministries or Christian things that are actually coming out. And I don't know how it came about, the bridge. And I think I even went to the website, and I have probably some messed up memory of what it really looked like. But I remember it was interesting. It was appealing to me. How did that go about? And what is the framing of the time, and
Yeah.
year, what was going on during that time, and how did it come about?
Okay. I'll try to do this briefly. Timeline. Todd is better at dates than I am, so nobody get mad if I get the dates wrong. So I got deported. I had met Todd at TomFest. For those out there, Todd was one of the original founders of TomFest.
Wow.
And I think I had come home for a visit, took my little sister to it, met Todd. He was kind of an asshole. We have a joke about it. He does the thing where he does, inside jokes with people that aren't on the inside. So he just.
I think there's a name for that, or a word for it. I can't think of it right now. But
better. But so then I was deported. I ended up back in the home of my parents, which was not a healthy situation for me or for my two younger siblings that I had helped raise that had been stuck there. Todd and I started dating. He had been because he was in a band called Sapo. They had done some touring, with, I won't go into all the bands. Anyway, he ended up in Seattle, met Ken and Deborah and Crystal, who basically had been invited by some crusty Christians that lived here. And by crusty, I mean like, the train hoppers and the freedmans. And around the same time, Todd and I were dating. Ken and Deborah and Crystal moved here with a small group of people because they had been basically told by their church in Seattle that if they were going to start anything, so fucked up, they needed to go at least 100 miles away.
As a positive thing, as in like, hey, go and preach to the nations type of thing, or as in get the hell out of here?
Yeah, get the hell out because we're worried that they're going to steal our sheep.
Okay, gotcha.
They started the bridge in. Todd and I got married in 97, so I think it was like 96.
Oh, wow. So this is...
no, maybe it was 97. Probably 97.
Late 90s.
Yeah, late 90s.
Wow, this is far back.
Yeah, Todd and I get married. The opening of the bridge is the next weekend. We're on our honeymoon. We're not even in the picture.
Of course, what better time?
But my friend Vion from Holland is in the photo of the first bridge photo.
It was an international inauguration of the bridge.
Yeah, exactly. So it to sum it up, it was basically people giving God one last chance. And that shifted and changed over the years with Ken and Deborah and Crystal. It did look different than normal church, but there were still some things that kind of fit with normal church. I mean,
how did it look like? What were some things that contextualizing in that moment were different? Like you guys were like, we're going to try and do this different. As ridiculous as it might sound now.
I would even say we didn't try. We were just, Todd and I did music. So we wrote all the music from story, so indigenously within our community, about, the struggle of having a faith. It's
so you had your own liturgy, like you had your own.
And we did comedy troupes where people would give the announcements of church looking like in Gregorian chant, dressed like monk.
That's awesome.
Some Sundays it was in an old music venue that eventually Todd also started doing our all ages music venue, the Meow Meow in. So we would have, 150 people up there with dogs, and like people would bring their dogs, and it was the room was completely dark so that people that had been shamed singing could feel like they could sing and not be the center of attention, and
Yeah.
people were banging on stuff, and it was very punk, and a lot of artists, a lot of atheists, agnostics, Christians trying to work it out. At that time, you could come if you were gay, and it was probably a better place than still most churches are to this day.
Yeah.
We had a transformation as a community from, I think, saying we loved gay people, and then truly transforming as a community, where basically Jeff and I Ken started a homeless church run by homeless people, for homeless people downtown. Crystal moved away. Deborah eventually stepped down to pursue her doctorate and other things that she wanted to do. And so Jeff, Neil, and I were, I think for the first time, I don't want to say anything negative against Ken and Deborah. I think they were trying to have flat leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And that was definitely a goal and a passion for them, but it was not flat as I consider flat. They were getting paid more than us. And then Jeff and I completely made it flat.
Okay.
We got paid the same, which meant we almost got paid nothing. We, over the years, we had people transition publicly in our community. We started using pronouns. We started evolving as a community as everybody else is evolving, and figuring out that, we are all on a spectrum. So that, to me, it became, probably to the outside person, it maybe didn't look like we were Christian anymore, because we didn't necessarily use the Bible. Sometimes we used scripture, sometimes we didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Our talking or preaching was more out of, I would say, emotional intelligence, like how do you survive? Because I believe Jesus was passionate about us not only surviving in the world, but thriving and changing. And and also at the same time started during Ken and Deborah's time, where we started getting donations from, we started with donations from Starbucks, because Ken worked there, all their spoils. And then somebody told us about Trader Joe's giving spoils. And so we started this thing that ended up being called by Food Church by the Crusty Punks. And we didn't name it that. And so we would do spoils from Trader Joe's, New Seasons, Whole Foods, and we would pass out bags of vegetarian, and we call them vegetarian and meat bags. And eventually it grew to 100 to 150 people coming to get food.
And this was kind of this was like an arm or an extension of the bridge.
Yeah, every Sunday we did it. So we would have 15 people showing up for church. And then 150 people showing up for food, because guess what? When you don't guilt people for not coming to church, and you let them make decisions about their own lives because they're adults, they decide not to come to church.
I want to eat.
And so our hope was to eventually, I think, have Food Church be, so let me say this. I don't believe in tricking people into becoming saved.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's bullshit. Or you don't have to say the 4 spiritual laws or say a specific prayer. I did want to see less of a line between the food people and the people in the community. And there was, most of us, the reason we started Food Church in the first place was not altruistic. It was for our people, because everybody in our community lived way below the poverty line. So
Okay.
that's what it started for, was for us, and then we didn't close it off to anybody else. And I think the lines get blurred, and that's a beautiful thing, but it's uncomfortable. It's very uncomfortable for people that like to track progression.
Claro, especially like when you have like an organization or an entity or something that you're building.
So we got to the place in, I think this is September will be our 6th year of being closed, where I hadn't gotten paid in like 2 years. All of the money was going straight into the building, paying our rent. And our
Yeah.
landlord was amazing. She had a yoga studio in there, and she really tried to work with us. And finally we were like, we can't keep doing this to her.
Yeah.
We either need to decide as a community that we're going to keep going, and that means people are going to have to like try to get grants, and if we don't want to stay open, that's cool too. Let's make a decision as a community. And so we gave it 6 months, and I think that's difficult for people that were part of the community, because some people really gave it their all, and then some people, I think people just don't want to take ownership that they were ready for it to be done, and then all of a sudden they were
Yeah.
sad that it was over, because literally I have never been to a place where you could be a staunch atheist and do music from the front with everybody else,
In the
and
church.
nobody knew. Yeah, because it's not, church is for, if I even believe in church, I would say community is for everybody regardless of your belief system, and that's
Yeah.
all we're trying to do, is make a therapeutic community which would have food and help with shelter and maybe some money coming in. And yeah, so we had to close, and that was super hard for me because I never saw myself not pastoring, and now I can't imagine going back to that.
I think that's emblematic to many things in life. Like with you, I remember when I first moved to the US when I was a little kid, I didn't want to leave Puerto Rico. I was like 8 or 9. Then I was here. I didn't want to leave my friends here. And then when I finally got to Puerto Rico, I didn't want to go back. So it's always a little bit of like, I didn't taste it. I tasted it. And then in hindsight, the mind evolves a little bit.
Yeah.
What do you think as that, let's call it chapter, as that chapter closed, how did you get that fixed? How did you get, if we were to call it a fix, how did you transition from a Sunday activity or like just that community experience to no longer there? What was that process like, and what did that, perhaps maybe that emptiness transform into? Like, how did you feel that bridge shaped your heart?
Well, I'm very glad that I was already doing spiritual direction and archery, because I get to have spiritual conversations with people all across, beliefs. I mean, that is something I've been able to have and value, and I get to spend time with people talking about faith or meditation or whatever. I think I'm just now moving out of grief, and it's been 6 years.
Mm-hmm.
Todd's experience has been a little bit different because he hasn't had the outlets that I've had.
Mm-hmm.
The biggest thing for us was just, we sang the songs of our church all over the world. We got to, Agents of Future got to go to Greenbelt. I got to go to Wild Goose, multiple times. And we weren't done singing together. And not all of our, I wouldn't say our songs are necessarily religious, but maybe spiritual.
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing I think that Todd and I didn't realize was going to happen, is that we wouldn't get to sing together as much, because you're not going to get invited. I think we've gotten invited twice to a bar over, the course of our marriage, which is 21 years, to sing Agents of Future songs. Once was in Mexico, and then once was in Portland with our opening for our friends.
That's good. You guys have like a per decade
Yeah, exactly.
gig.
So yeah, I still haven't made peace with that because we've done a few things during the pandemic. That Todd and I have just done like a live Facebook and sang Agents of Future songs. And that's been amazing because our friends from like Wales to South Africa to all over the United States
That's
have
neat.
joined. Um, so for me, I think it's tricky probably for most people that leave the church, even though, I kind of left unwillingly because I was in a place where I could believe whatever I wanted to believe.
Mm-hmm.
Um, the grief is in the loss of community
Claro.
because
Yeah, that's what that's what I'm curious about, because it's not a departure that is of classic nature,
yeah,
quote unquote classic nature, but it's a project that you're invested into, but it just slowly gets to a point where you're like, okay, it is that time
yeah.
to go on.
I think preparing myself by preparing my community and saying, one, I didn't just leave them high and dry.
Mm-hmm.
Once we closed, somebody had recommended to me to offer to take people to other churches that
Mm-hmm.
were open and affirming. Nothing was like the bridge. Most of them were like Anglican or Episcopal or Lutheran.
Yeah, more classical.
Yeah, but still open and affirming. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not going to take any of the people from the bridge to some place that's not going to accept them. That was very painful, to sit in my own grief while I'm like, yes, what do you think about this community? And introducing them to the pastor that I knew or whatever. I think other than the music, what Todd and I weren't prepared for was the loss of relationship. Like we basically were cut out. And I don't think it was intentional. I don't think people went, fuck Todd and Angie and their
Yeah,
kids. I think they were dealing with their own grief
of course. Yeah.
and had been so used to Todd and I and Jeff and his wife Crystal instigating the parties and all the different celebrations that when it came time to reach out to us, there was no reciprocation. And then also on top of it, dealing with the grief of your children, that these adults that they considered family just basically ghosted them. So then that gets transferred to God, and you've done all this work to let God be a feminist that's open and not restricted to anything, but the very grief that the people in the community were going through ended up painting God with this brush of, you're not worth my fucking time, which I worked really hard to communicate to my kids that if I believe anything about God, God can handle our rage, God can handle our disappointment, and God is not bound by human constraints, but the very humans that they admired constrained God.
Yeah.
So there we have it. I can't do anything about that. I can just be a listening ear and let my kids have their own journey. But as a mother, it makes me very angry.
And I've had you comment on your experience with archery and the connection to spirituality in that realm. I had a talk with I don't know if you know Ryan Meeks.
The name sounds familiar.
He was pastor of church in Washington, I believe, East Community,
Yeah.
and I think he fully came out as a agnostic atheist, I think, and the church basically underwent a transformation, a Christian church. And even their whole liturgy and their songs and everything changed. And now, now he does something not in the form of archery, but he does these like a form of, man, sorry, Ryan, if I totally butcher what you do.
He'll forgive you.
Yeah, he's very graceful. A sense of counseling to people that are transitioning.
Yeah.
In whatever their walk particularly is.
Yeah.
through atheism, Gnosticism, yeah, whatever, Satanism, whatever, and then he serves as an accompanying element, as an accompanying resource, as an accompanying person to that person that is attempting to transition that. What has been, your own like what is it for you that archery has done? Is that something that you knew or were related to as a child? How
Yeah.
did you encounter? I've never, other than when I was a little kid and I had probably a little plastic thing and the whole concept of cowboy and Indian.
Yeah.
But I've never really done it. What drove you to it? What connected to you? How did you find it? And how has it become this thing that it
Oh,
is now for you?
well, I wanted to do it my whole life. Never had an opportunity, even though I grew up in the country with a lot of like hunters and, loggers. And my dad had made us a bow one time camping, one of little twigs. Loved it. We even had a guy in our community, Abe Burns, who is the godfather of one of my kids. And I think early on, he's like a world champion archer, traveled all over the world doing archery. And I even went to him one time saying, when I found out, hey, I would love archery. I've always wanted to try it, but I think would you ever take me? But I wasn't clear enough. So it just went right over his head.
Yeah,
And then
happens.
Todd finally was like, every movie or cartoon where somebody is doing archery, I'm always like, oh my God, I want to do that so bad. And so for Mother's Day, almost maybe 10 years ago now, I think 10 years ago now, I thought we were going hiking in Washington Park, which is where I usually take people now. It's a famous park in Portland that has a free archery range. We drove up there, and it's also famous for its trails. And Abe was there. I've had one official lesson,
From
and
him.
yeah. And now I've had more. Like recently, I upped my teaching credentials and stuff. But I think the thing about archery is it unlocks something that is primal and necessary, because we are made to be good citizens. But good citizens do not make for very good allies or activists or anti-racists.
Mm-hmm.
It also doesn't make for somebody that can stand up against sexual trauma and violence, done to them in the name of God or any structure. And something clicked for me when I did it that was so visceral, where you have to, when you're doing archery, you have to pull back the bow, you anchor on the side of your face, literally touching your hand to your face, or if you don't, you'll punch yourself in the face. So you pull back, you're straining against because I use a recurve bow. So you're straining against the bowstring. And when you release it, it's powerful. It's like this whang, hits the target. And I tell this story all the time because I started to make a connection with it in myself. And then I have a friend who I met through Wild Goose West who had a friend die. They committed suicide. There was no note. There was just grief upon grief upon grief. And Mara and I started taking her up to go shooting. Eventually she got her own bow. And we would just shoot and talk or not talk. And sometimes she'd talk about trying to work through, it was like a chosen family friend that died. And one day, and I'll never forget it, because I tell the story all the time because that's how powerful it was. She pulls back her bow and she said, I'm just so fucking angry. And she releases it. It hits the target and it was like the twang. And she looks at me and she just said, that was so cathartic. So I came back home and I was talking to Todd and I was like, I know there is something that I could do to help. I wouldn't go as far as say manufacture it, but create the container that can hold that.
Mm-hmm.
or get at it for people, because we carry so much rage and anger inside that we're never given permission, especially women,
Mm-hmm.
also men, because you have appropriate rage that you're allowed to have, but you're not allowed to have grief or sorrow or, to cry, all these stipulations put on the sexes. So I know how to do this journaling that's based in Carl Jung's shadow work. It's by this man named Ira Prokof, called intensive journaling, and I was trained in it. So Todd prompts, and that was born. Are you there? And
Aquí,
then
aquí ahora. Good, good, good.
and then I teach them to shoot in like 5 minutes.
It's like we're having some connection issues. Give me 1 second. Okay, let me take this one out. I have a duplicate. There we go. Now we're good.
Almost
Okay.
started singing.
Dale, dale. So sorry about that. So probably maybe a minute and a half ago, if you can recall.
Oh yeah. So I, I realized very quickly that she tapped into something that every human needs permission to tap into, and I would say on a regular basis. Um, and archery does that really well, really quickly. So I take people through this Jungian journaling technique, Carl Jung's shadow work, based in this man named Ira Prokof, basically worked alongside Jung, created this journaling technique that unlocks everything from rage, anger, grief, loss, body, roads that you didn't take in your life, um, everything. It's amazing. And I've been trained in that. And so I created a workshop that I take people to the archery range. We do this like 45-minute journaling. Out of it comes something that maybe they want to focus their shooting on, because you get a nugget. You get some of this, the inner voice, Holy Spirit, inner voice, wisdom, whatever you want to call it, always has something to say.
Uh-huh.
If you listen. And then in 5 minutes, I teach them how to shoot, and they're shooting. And by the end, I can't describe it. I mean, I've taken hundreds of people from every walk of life, from little kids to, 80-year-olds shooting, and everybody gets some kind of transformational nugget. That led into people that maybe don't want to start with me at rage and anger. I created another one that is teaching people about just the basics of mindfulness,
Uh-huh.
reconnecting to ourselves through mindfulness in the woods. So I take them on a mindfulness walk in the woods, and then do basically the same thing, shooting in 5 minutes, and then you're shooting for like half an hour, 45 minutes. And by the end, it's just, I mean, it is uncanny. There is something, it's somatic. It's the somatic healing element that, we're now just kind of discovering, where if you can bring things from inside your body out, something transformational happens. And so I use that. I use the journaling in my private practice with people. I do similar work as Ryan. I help people deconstruct whatever faith they need deconstructed. I help people find a spiritual practice. And by spiritual practice, what I mean is not necessarily religious or Christian, but what is going to keep you connected? Because I don't care who you are, atheist, agnostic, you know, Christian, Muslim, Hindu, everybody needs a spiritual practice of some kind to help keep us connected
Hmm.
to the inside. That mind, body, spirit connection, soul connection, whatever you want to call it. And it's different for everybody. And so whoever you are, whatever you believe, you deserve that.
You go on telling this, and it seems to me quite fascinating. I've never been at the very slight bit curious as to archery. I mean, I mean, even the word, it's quite a foreign
I can't
word for
imagine you
me.
not being interested.
As you narrate it, you made it really, really, really interesting, and not just the power of narration, but just the fact that you've been doing it for a while, and just the fact that you're just sharing, like what you're sharing, I find very, very intriguing, very intriguing, to presentially witness it on others, and also to be able to practice it myself. I think that'd be kind of a shame that you couldn't come down here to
I'm coming
Houston.
back at some point, if not if, when this is finally over.
Claro, claro. When this is cleared
And you're
up,
going to do it. I'm going to take you through it.
see, if it does happen, you come down here for sure. Like I have a better perspective and more of a context. Have you videoed yourself doing this? Have you
Oh,
done
yeah.
any sort of things are available to see
Yeah,
or
just I have stuff on my Instagram at Angie Fadel Soul Care. I have stuff on my website at angiefadel.com. I videoed myself. I videoed other people that have allowed me to. I I I offer it on a regular basis to. I'm a part of this organization called PDX, which stands for Portland
hmm.
Alliance for Self Care, which is Black, brown, like BIPOC, queer, immigrant, activist self care communities. So they are providing all kinds of self care opportunities for people in Portland that identify in one or more of those categories to soak with other BIPOC people, to get, um, massage or acupuncture or self care kits or food and I've done a few workshops with them, taking the BIPOC community up and I mean, they got a lot to be angry about. I feel like I got a lot to be angry about as a survivor,
Hmm.
and that's something that I'm I'm passionate about working in those communities and hopefully eventually my goal with the woman that started it, Tamia, is to eventually train somebody else in that community to do some of what I do. I probably couldn't, I mean, I've been doing the journaling for like 15 years and it takes a lot of doing it over and over again with people to know how it works, but I can teach the mindfulness,
Hmm.
the body connection. And so the hope is to train other people in the BIPOC community to do it so somebody doesn't have to be vulnerable with a white woman.
As bringing bring this conversation to a close, I'm curious to what do you feel, as a friend, as a mother, as a partner, as a, I would say, a community leader. What would you feel are some? It's not going to be the 5 year plan. Where do you see yourself 5 years? But what do you feel are some areas that you have not done? Maybe some tasks, some things that you would like to find yourself doing. Maybe as a result of this that you have been doing so far. Maybe this is a catapult to the next or another thing. But what are some things that you perhaps have reflected on that you would like to do? Maybe these are plans that you're having right now, As we
with all
bring
my
this to a
students.
close, that you can share a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I want to keep doing what I'm doing because I love empowering people to feel everything that they need to feel. Um, so I want to keep doing that. I was working on going and doing the archery workshops in the UK this summer, and obviously that did not happen. So that's still on the list. I would like to get this in the hands of more people. I'm working on a book, which is I don't have a publisher, but I've been doing those mantras for the rest of us for probably almost 2 years now. So I think I have almost 100 mantras that I want to put into a
Oh,
book
nice.
and then also make postcards. Um, I, if I think practically on what I'm witnessing because of the pandemic, the thing, and the Black Lives Matter protests that are happening in Portland that I've been able to go to, and the thing that I keep going back to over and over again is people are being traumatized. They already had trauma.
Vale.
People are being traumatized on top of trauma on top of trauma. And it's not new to Portland. I don't care what fucking Ted Wheeler says. They have been gassing and pepper spraying the people of this city since day one. So, whatever you hear, that's not true. Right after Trump got elected, I watched and I did eye wash for people that were at a family friendly protest, and the police pepper sprayed them and rubber bulleted, or I think it was flash bombs. So if I think right now in this moment, I have to first say I can see that I am a white woman, and that is a problem for trusting me. And at the same time, I am going to be working towards whatever I can with whoever I can towards to supply avenues for trauma relief. So continuing to work with PDX Alliance for Self-Care, the person I introduced you to, who does Black Men's Wellness, because I'm just now noticing the trauma that I felt down there. And I was relatively protected as somebody that was just helping the medics. But that's on top of a pandemic of trauma, 400
Mm-hmm.
years of, oppression and violence against Black and brown people. I don't know what that looks like for me. If that means when this is over and I'm able to do archery, that I start working exclusively with, women and men that are interested in learning archery from that perspective. Because I'm not
Mm-hmm.
interested in teaching people archery. I'm interested in people getting free,
Vale.
difficult, and painful emotions and being able to express them in a safe environment. But I think that's really, I don't know what that's going to look like or how to support, because I don't have money. I'm not loaded, or, I'm just putting one foot in front of the other, thinking to the very small degree that I experienced trauma down there are people that have, I think now we probably are getting close to 70 nights in a row that have gone down there.
Wow.
Not to mention the feds feeding people up, batoning people, all the other things. Also what are the long-term effects of gassing your own community? Cancer,
Jesus.
and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
abortive. Like, women are going to have abortions that they did not want.
Yeah.
Um, so I think also I did want to say this. This kind of goes in with your question, but my advocacy or anti-racism for me, this is not necessarily for anybody else, is tied up with my spirituality. I do not have one without the other. You can have justice without spirituality. I find it hard to believe you can have spirituality without justice, because that should move you towards justice. If your
Claro.
spirituality is not moving you towards justice, I'm sorry, but your spirituality is not worth much,
Yeah.
because it's not working justice for other people. So I don't know what that looks like, but for me, they are tied up together. And I just want to see people have opportunities for somatic healing, whether that's archery, whether that's hiking in the woods, whether that's throwing, an axe at a wall, something that gets that because that stuff stays stagnant in our body and creates toxicity that
Yeah.
gives us back pain, ulcers, anxiety, depression. And when that gets released, yes, we may go out again. We may have layer on layer on layer that just has to be released. I do. But at least if you're getting a little bit of release, I want to work towards providing a safe place for people to release that. So they don't, not only are they experiencing injustice and violence, but then without even knowing it, it's that person that did it to them got to also destroy their bodies. Because as a survivor of sexual abuse, I am constantly having to deal with something that somebody did to me, and then my body, faltering because of it.
Yeah.
You're victimized on all these ends, and I feel like people should not have to experience that and then continue to have it destroy their bodies. So whatever way I can do that, that's what I'm going to be working towards.
Yeah. That talks about having a sincere approach to traumas. To to not want to gloss things over because we might find ourselves uncomfortable at the sight or at the listening of a story, to
Mm-hmm.
really allow it to be,
Yeah,
because the trauma is a trauma, is not intended to be comfortable.
yeah,
It's intended to be this lasting effect that has affected a person quite deeply, and to start dialoguing with that trauma, to come to terms with it and then start healing it. It needs to come out. It needs to be announced
yeah,
as real and as vivid and as undomesticated and as unedited as possible.
absolutely. Yeah.
Gracias, thank you, Angie. I've really
Yeah,
enjoyed chatting and seeing you, and I hope that Jesus, with everything that's going on in Portland, that people know about, those that don't know about, just takes a Google away to know all the atrocities that
yeah,
are going on in Portland. I hope that now that you have the other kid back home, I think I hope that this brings a new level of joy amongst
yeah,
you, Todd, and the sister. I think it's important to these times, these times, to be appreciative of that. So good vibes to you,
yeah.
much
Thank you.
peace to you.
Thank you.
So amigos, amigas, those of you who are tuned in, passing by, thank you so much. So
Yeah.
mucha paz, mucho amor, and I'll see you guys until next time. Ciao.
Bye.